I tend to selfishly look at like who's influenced me the most.
Yeah, I mean, because for everybody who's listening, the only one who matters here
Right.
is Justin,
It's
obviously. So I
it's
mean that
my show. You're listening
goes
for
without saying.
for you know,
Say it's my yeah. I'm just here. I'll go fuck myself
it's
now.
my show. It's my
Yeah,
show.
it's his show. It's his show.
I'm Justin Lesko, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt and a former pro MMA fighter.
And I'm Mike Callahan, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt and a law enforcement officer.
Conor McGregor is probably the most well-known UFC fighter of all time, and we're not debating whether or not he's the greatest fighter ever, but is he the most influential?
Right. Like, has he impacted this sport more than anyone else? And if he hasn't, who has been more influential than Conor McGregor?
And who is Jiu-Jitsu's most influential athlete of all time?
So we have a few people in mind for both sports, and we're going to be talking about them tonight.
Well, if you want to be the most influential fighter ever, you should probably think about how you look while changing the game, and the way you look your best is in a rash guard from Crown Rash Guards.
So all you need is a simple, minimalist design. That way the attention's on you and your game and not on some fire-breathing dragon that you got on your shirt at a tournament.
Crown Rash Guards are durable, high quality, and they won't break the bank. So why not grab 2 or 3 for the same price you'd pay for one of the other guy's Rash Guards?
So head over to www.crownrashguards.com. Check out their selection and make sure that when you get to the checkout, you let them know that we sent you.
Notice that you're sticking with the WWWs there.
Yep, just letting people know.
Let's look at some of the most influential people in our sport. Welcome to That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. Obviously it's a Conor fight week, and
Right.
everyone in the world knows who Conor McGregor is, whether you watch the UFC or not. And some of my friends at work, like, they started chatting this week about like, yo, is Conor the best fighter ever? Because they're not fight fans, you know what I mean? He's just the guy they know.
Right.
It's the same thing people did when Ronda was at her peak, was like, everyone knows who Ronda is, whether you watch her or not. So it kind of sent me down the rabbit hole of not who's the greatest fighter, but has anyone had a bigger impact on the sport? And then I started thinking about jiu-jitsu wise too. And I think that there's a pretty long list of people who have influenced both sports.
Yeah.
So I thought we could look at a few and see if we could determine who, in our less than humble opinion, is most influential.
So I think there's a difference too, because like when you talk about like people who've had impacts on jujitsu and people who've had impacts, I'm sorry, I'm saying impacts. People who have had an impact on jujitsu or people who have had an impact on MMA. Um, so MMA is like a global thing, and jujitsu is to a certain extent, but not to the level that MMA is. So like when you have like a truly polarizing figure like Conor McGregor, it's like he's like a global phenomenon almost. You know what I mean? Like you're not really going to get that in jujitsu, but within the world that we live in, because we're jujitsu junkies and yeah, like those people are polarizing, but like on a like the in a broader sense, like if you get a polarizing figure in MMA, like it's pretty incredible how their stardom like just takes off.
Well, you can look too at influence and impact in a couple different ways, like Connor's impact bringing jiu-jitsu to, or bringing the UFC to the mainstream. That's like undoubtable. It's irrefutable. But has he made an impact on the sport technique wise or athletically? I
Mm.
He hasn't changed the game, you know what I mean? There's a lot of people who have. So I realize there's a lot of branches in the tree of influence. Like, yeah, you could say Dana White has influenced the sport the most, but that's not fun because I want to talk about athletes and fighters. Or you could say like Carlos Gracie Jr. started the IBJJF. Like, yeah, that's a major influence, but I would more like to look at bringing the sport to the mainstream as an athlete and impacting the technique and the skill of the sport as an athlete. Like I think that's just a more fun conversation, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I view, we could sit here if you want to like differentiate between impact and influence and influence, the different types of influence. Like we'll be here all night. But
Some of us have to work tomorrow.
some of us have to work at noon tomorrow. Save the world. But
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, like, I don't want to get too down. Like, you can pull on so many threads. I don't want to get to like, yeah, Joe Rogan has influenced jujitsu with his
no, let's
podcast. Let's
let's
talk for 20 minutes about
let's
that.
just
Like,
let's just talk about athletes. Like I think that given um, the extent to which the UFC and MMA, for that matter, are in the mainstream now, there's no debating that no fight that any that Conor McGregor has reached a level of notoriety that is greater than any fighter ever. Like
yeah,
with the exception of maybe Ronda Rousey. But
yeah,
Conor McGregor has reached a level of notoriety that is just it's unparalleled. You know,
yeah. And like that's like I said, when I started, people who I work with who don't watch fighting and
right.
couldn't name anyone besides Conor McGregor can name Conor McGregor. And there's a reason for that. And obviously, I think he's one of the best fighters in the world. I think he's on the list of one of the greatest UFC fighters for his talent, but also what he's done moving the sport to the mainstream. But I also think that he's stepping on a stone that Ronda Rousey did lay by jumping into the mainstream too. Like she didn't get as far into the mainstream as he did, but you can't deny that there was people who were only watching the UFC if Ronda was fighting because what she was doing to everyone she was fighting.
Yeah.
And she was in the Entourage movie, which, I mean, what a masterpiece.
Yeah, it was such a disappointment. But no, I think that Connor is I don't want to say he's a generational talent. Like John Jones is a generational talent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but Conor McGregor, I'll call it the product, the show, whatever it
The
is,
brand.
the brand. Like that's, I mean, you don't see those a lot. We've never
Yeah.
seen that before, and I think it's a combination of his ability to sell himself and his personality and his persona and his charisma. But I think a large chunk of that is the fact that the UFC is so mainstream now. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, and it goes hand in hand. Like they are so mainstream, partly off of his back. They're more mainstream, which makes him more famous in the general population. So
so let me ask you this: if you and I have my own thoughts on it, but if you had to gauge the jump in let me think about this. Like you know how like the UFC, you're saying the UFC's jump into the mainstream has just grown exponentially since McGregor got here, right? So would you compare? Would you say that that jump is bigger than the initial jump that they experienced, like coming off of like season one when Chuck Liddell was there, and like with Griffin and Bonner? Because to me, that is the biggest jump that this sport has ever seen. Like from going into the mainstream from like next to nothing, for those
yeah.
first like 4 or 5 years there.
I mean, there could be a tie between Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin because that main event of that finale, brought a whole new level of fans and awareness to the UFC. And took it to the next level.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that as many people who aren't fight fans in the time of that first fight between Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin, if you asked a random person walking down the street who Forrest Griffin was, they still wouldn't know. But if I ask a random person walking down the street who Conor McGregor is, they know who he is.
Yeah,
So
but
it's like,
I don't think that that's him. I think that that's because of the where the sport is at, and I think that's in large part because of those like early the pioneers of those early days. Not saying like, because here's the deal: when you go back to the original UFCs with like Hoist and like Shamrock and Severin and all those guys, and even like when you start becoming a little bit more modern, with like Mark Coleman and Mark Kerr and those guys, like it still was like those guys. It was nothing back then. Like that was before the company was fucking. That was when the company was ready to go bankrupt. I think that the work that the UFC and by proxy those fighters did in those early days of like the Ultimate Fighter, and like 16 years ago today was the first episode of the Ultimate Fighter. So like that to me is the a milestone. Like that is a true landmark in the sport of MMA. Like that's the starting point. Like from that point on until, you know, like 2010, I'll call that like early mainstream years. And I think that that was more. I don't know. I think that was a bigger for the sport than what Conor McGregor does. Obviously, because
well,
there wouldn't be a fucking sport.
but again, like there wouldn't be a sport for Conor to push the boundaries of if there was no Ultimate Fighter Season 1 with Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin, and there's no UFC and Jiu-Jitsu if there's no Royce Gracie. So
Right. Right.
I know our business is a lot of what have you done for me lately, but I don't think you can discount Royce Gracie as perhaps the most influential person because of what he did at UFC 1 and brought MMA and jiu-jitsu sort of look at what we are, you know?
Isn't it like crazy too to like just think of like, I think I've talked about this on the show before, but like I always have these discussions with my brother-in-law. Like if you took the Super Bowl champions from like 1985 and put them up against the Super Bowl champions from like 2015, there's no way that they're going to win. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it's just the game evolves, right? Like the game evolves. And MMA and combat sports are no different. Like in boxing, like if can you imagine what Tyson Fury would do to Mike Tyson? Like everybody talks about Mike Tyson in his prime. Could you imagine what Tyson Fury right now would do to Mike Tyson in his prime? The
Yeah.
game has just evolved. It's not the fact that he's 6'9" and he's almost 300 pounds or 260 or whatever he is, or 70. It's just the skill set has evolved, and it's the same thing. Like, could you imagine Royce Gracie now, even if they let him wear a fucking gi, walking into an octagon against I don't even know, like, who? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
does he crack the top 15 at any
no.
division?
I was gonna say, like, who's the welterweight champ in like CFFC? Like they would run through Royce Gracie. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
But still, with that being said, that's not his fault.
No, he was just born too early, I guess.
No, but like
You know what
he
I mean?
made
Just
his skill set proved to be the best. Like at the time, that was an innovative skill set. You know what I mean? And he
yeah.
mastered it. And yeah, I mean, but like without that, without him, are we even having a show?
No.
Do we even know each other? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
fuck, what
Well,
is this world even like? If Justin and I don't know each other, is this what the fuck? Like, does this world even exist at this point? Like,
yeah. What's the point?
I don't even want to think about it. Ugh,
But
just threw up in my mouth.
I do wanna touch again on Ronda because what Hoist did for the sport in general, Ronda kind of did. So Ronda falls chronologically in between Connor and Hoist.
Right.
but she did what Connor did and took it, more mainstream, but she also introduced she introduced women's MMA to the forefront, and like there wouldn't be a women's UFC division if it wasn't for Ronda, and now we have like four of them. So yeah, I think you have to put her on the list of influential people.
She really wasn't like a dynamic fighter. You know what I mean? Like Hoist at the time, like the skill set. If you look back at like the early days with Hoist, like his skill set was just kind of like there weren't a lot of people that were familiar with jiu-jitsu, and that people didn't really know
Yeah,
how to deal with it. And you know, women's MMA was new when Ronda was, out there, and not a lot of people knew how to deal with her. Like she was a bull. She would go in there, she would toss people on her head. Now listen, I know that she knocked, who'd she knock out? She knocked out Betch
Betch
Correa,
Kahea,
and
the
then
accountant from 2 years before that fight, Betch Kahea.
she knocked out, didn't she knock out Sarah McMahon? But what I mean, like these are people like Ronda Rousey wasn't a dynamic fighter. She was, but again, that's not her fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Just like it's not Hoist's fault. Like
yeah,
it but that's not her fault. But that doesn't mean that she wasn't influential, or she wasn't like a trailblazer for women's MMA, or
yeah.
that she didn't have an enormous impact on the sport. Like she was the top draw in that company. Now listen, a lot of that has to do with the way she looked too. Like let's be honest. You know what I mean?
She was more in the mainstream pop culture because people thought she could be a movie star, which she couldn't. I mean, I think we're in agreement right now that if you had to pick who is most influential, your choices are Hoist, Stephen Bonner, and Forrest Griffin as one choice, Connor slash Ronda. Like that's sort of the pool you're pulling from.
So I think that one person who got a lot of credit back in the day, but it's kind of forgotten about, is Chuck Liddell. Like Chuck Liddell put the UFC on his back for like
Yeah.
3 years there, and he was running through people.
He was the first MMA fighter to be on the cover of ESPN the magazine.
And he actually
Random tidbit for you.
he was actually he was on Entourage, the TV show, not the shitty movie, and he did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But he was like a cornerstone. Like look, when you think about
Yeah.
that time, it's like Chuck Liddell, Rich Franklin, Matt Hughes, like those three,
Yeah.
and then like kind of transitioned into Anderson Silva and those guys. But like those three who were established, like Forrest and Stefan, weren't really established fighters, and I think that kind of like added to their storyline and everything. Like these guys weren't even at UFC fighters, and like now they're making moves and everything. But like established, like champions, Chuck Liddell, Rich Franklin, Matt Hughes.
Well, I mean,
They
like
don't.
Rich Franklin was a fucking math teacher,
Yeah.
UFC fighter,
Mm-hmm.
and Chuck Liddell was, I'm gonna try to do guest spots on TV, and I'm gonna be more in
Mm-hmm.
the pop culture, and so I think he definitely started the bridge of coming out of like the dark days of the UFC,
Yeah.
like
Yep.
90s, into a more normalized sport. Being involved with the first Ultimate Fighter. He just didn't do a ton of stuff that launched influence forward. Like he didn't do as much as Ronda did in pop culture. He did some. Ronda did some more, and then Connor's done the most kind of thing. So there's a
I.
lot of
Yeah.
guys you could say. There's a lot of people you could say, but I think there's a short list of like Hoist for talent wise, for showing the world what jiu-jitsu was, and for winning the first UFC by design. Like that was the reason he was there, was to win it. I think you really can't go too far away from him. I guess we probably should have prefaced this conversation with, we are not going to give you the definitive answer because I don't think there is one. But
No, it's all subjective, but um, like if you're talking about talent, like who's had the most impact, like talent wise, who's put it together the most, like who have you looked at overall and you're like, holy shit, like that guy is again a generational talent. Like I think it comes back to John Jones. I don't necessarily think that Royce Gracie, Conor McGregor, or Ronda Rousey you've ever looked at like that. Like Conor is a master at his craft, or a master of his craft. Which, by the way, I saw a master at his craft on Facebook today. I'm like, that doesn't work, and I just said it. So
Did you unfriend the person?
no, but I will after this because that's fucking bullshit. So, not taking anything away from these people, but like, has there ever been a more talented fighter than John Jones?
Well, I think GSP is the same mold of I'm going to beat you at boxing because I feel like it this time. I'm going to out wrestle you because I feel like it this time.
Right.
And George St. Pierre never tested positive for anything. So I'm going to go with GSP is a generational talent who I think would be a better ambassador for the sport. But John Jones was sponsored by Nike at one point. They had the Bones Nose shirts, and that was, if he wouldn't have been such a scumbag,
And
he
then
could have.
then he hit a pregnant woman in a car, and
Right? If he wasn't such a scumbag, he could have been
then you
the
like,
talent plus what Connor is right now in pop culture. But he's just,
no, I don't
scumbagged
think
it out.
I don't think he could have. I don't think he could have. Which, by the way, let's not call him a scumbag, and not let's give Conor McGregor a free pass. Conor McGregor literally just got served with a lawsuit today for
Yeah, I saw
sexual
that.
assault.
Yeah. You're
Conor
right. That's a fair
McGregor.
point. You're right.
Conor McGregor is had some shit associated with his name too. Like, he's not GSP is like a good ambassador to the sport. Everybody's got skeletons in their closet. So, but yeah, I forgot about GSP. But like generational talents.
Yeah.
But in terms of a brand, like Conor McGregor's his own brand. Ronda Rousey was her own brand.
Yeah. I think if Hoist existed today, like if the events of 1993 happened today, Hoist would have been a brand, but there was no Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or Instagram at UFC 1. So you were selling VHS videotapes. It's a little harder to generate a brand based around one athlete in a brand new fringe sport.
Right.
So
I agree.
I think someone else who gets overlooked is BJ Penn, because the reason there's lighter weight classes in the UFC is because of BJ Penn. And people look at BJ Penn and what he's become, and we've talked about him on this show, fall from grace is, I think, a gentle way to put it, but
trunk monkey for hire.
You don't have 155 pound, 145 pounds, 135 pounds without BJ Penn, because he showed the smaller guy, and I'm saying smaller in air quotes because I fought at 155 and I don't think I'm very small. The lighter weight classes can carry a show and can be stars. And he also influenced jiu-jitsu by being the first American to win a black belt gold medal at the World Championships. So he's double dipping on the influence.
Yeah, and regardless,
And he was
of
also
BJ,
on the best season of the Ultimate Fighter ever. Him versus Jens Pulver was the best Ultimate Fighter season.
No, the first one was. I mean, it's like,
The first one was iconic, but the fifth one was the best.
I've watched, I think, pretty much every one.
So you agree with me then?
No, I don't. I literally just said the first one. I won't let BJ's record sway me from the opinion that he is, pound for pound, one of the greatest fighters to ever fight in the UFC. He just, I often wonder what kind of athlete we would be talking about if he had the work ethic of George St. Pierre or one of those other guys.
But when you're talking about impact too, I think BJ was the first guy, and you can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. I think he was the first guy who was like, oh my God, he's a jiu-jitsu world champion. He's what we consider a specialist. He's a grappler. Oh my God, he just learned how to box and he's amazing at it and could do everything. And his nickname was the Prodigy for a reason. Like,
oh my God, he just beat up a bouncer.
Well, he didn't. Well, he did after he It was 19-19 after 2 rounds between him and that bouncer.
Yeah.
Um, he was the first guy who was like, you don't have to just be a specialist in one thing. We don't have to have a boxer or a wrestler or a kickboxer. We have a jiu-jitsu world champion who can knock people out with his hands.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he was the first because, like, that was the like those old Pancrase fights were, like the Shamrock Brothers,
Yeah.
Boss Rutan, and those guys. But again, like it was starting to become a little bit more mainstream, and when he was doing it, and he
But he was
was
he was the first to be a world champion in one sport and then develop the rest of the skills and be as well-rounded as his initial world championship sport.
I don't know about that. I don't know if he was as well rounded as in boxing as
There
he
was
was
a,
at
there was a
jiu-jitsu.
time where BJ Penn
He
was the
was
best
a
boxer in
fuck.
the UFC.
Oh, get the fuck out of here!
I'm telling you.
BJ Penn was a very good boxer, but he was a world champion in jiu-jitsu. A world champion in jiu-jitsu.
Side note, I wish BJ Penn would compete at submission only tournaments, fight to win, submission underground. Like I want to see BJ Penn doing jiu-jitsu. I don't want to see him being punched or punching, but I'd like to see him competing and rolling. But again, with jiu-jitsu, you can look like how far back do we go? Do we say there's no jiu-jitsu without Helio Gracie, or is there no jiu-jitsu without Maeda? Like
No, I
it's
think
it's the Hoist question again.
I think
Is there no sport without him?
I think Elio Gracie is the cutoff. Like, yeah, it is. Like, without him, we don't know each other.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know each other, but without certain people who I'm going to mention, and that's called a tease, we're doing really boring jujitsu. With the original Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, we would consider boring. If you could only play full guard, you could only do self-defense techniques, you could only do Kimuras and rear naked chokes, you wouldn't be into it as much. So we need people who have influenced it along the way, like Keenan has influenced jiu-jitsu. Eddie Bravo has influenced jiu-jitsu. You get these guys. If you're a person who's made a technique that the Gracies don't like, so they make it illegal, you have to have influenced jiu-jitsu.
Eddie Bravo's much, 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 much more influential than Keenan Cornelius. Much more influential. You're just a Keenan.
I agree. I just play.
You're a fucking Keenan Cornelius fuckboy, is what you are. Like you're total Keenan Cornelius fanboy. Like it's unbelievable. Like Keenan Cornelius literally just branched out on his own like 3 years ago, and he gained notoriety in the beginning through Lloyd Irvin, and then he went to Andre Galvo. Like, I would say that JT Torres is. I don't know why I just put the emphasis on T, but I would say that JT Torres is more influential and has had more of an impact on American jiu-jitsu or jiu-jitsu for that matter than Keenan.
I don't know. I think Keenan has taken the lapel guard and the worm guard and all of his innovations in the sport. I think that you see more people playing that. I don't think it's to the level of when people started playing rubber guard or doing twisters, which I love the twister, by the way. I'm very good at the twister.
Not
Stole it
that
from
good.
Eddie Bravo.
You're not that good at it.
I'm pretty good at it.
You're like,
That level of influence, and Eddie Bravo's 10th Planet system has
Yeah.
spawned a whole separate branch of jiu-jitsu.
right. Eddie Bravo is an innovator. He's an innovator.
Yeah, but then you also have guys like Marcelo who technique-wise might not be bringing in brand new techniques to the sport, but Marcelo is the first guy to really be the small guy representing, tap the bigger guy and beat everyone regardless of size. So where do you put that level of influence?
Marcelo Garcia is the greatest middleweight jiu-jitsu player of all time. Like I think we can agree on that.
Right.
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 You know,
Yeah.
and then you would in modern days like Danaher, right?
Well, yeah, and I know we said we're only going to focus on athletes, but
He's a
I'm
he's a jujitsu practitioner. He might
yeah,
not be like he's coming up with these. It's not like we're talking about a promoter here. You know,
he's not an executive, he's not an accountant
no,
or a promoter, like you said.
he's on the mat. He's conceptualizing these systems and these techniques, and he's putting them all together. And like, there's a lot of athletes who are benefiting from it. And I think that he his train is the one that's going to be moving exponentially faster in terms of advancing jujitsu than anybody else that we see for a while, you know. And his system's proven to be, I don't want to say flawless because there's no such thing as flawless.
It's the best system right now. It's the winningest system right now. But again, talking about pushing jiu-jitsu further, where do you put someone like Bernardo Faria from BJJ Fanatics? Did I say Bernardo instead of
Yeah.
Bernardo?
So, Bernardo, please excuse my dipshit co-host here, and his disrespect is not in any way an indication of how I feel. And I would never disrespect you by mispronouncing your name.
Sorry, Bernardo.
Yeah, now
I got caught
now
up in the moment. I was so excited to be mentioning you on our show again
Bernardo.
that
He's like he's the fifth Ninja Turtle.
but yeah, but pushing the sport forward, like we've talked about, with his instructionals, with his support of the athletes doing the instructionals. I think that that's
He
embracing a
is.
digital age that didn't exist 15 years ago.
Oh
I think
yeah.
that that's just as much influence as Eddie Bravo branching off in a new direction, or Dan Aher making a new system or improving upon a system.
Well, I don't think I think that we've talked about this before. Bernardo is a phenomenal ambassador for the sport, but like these guys, without him, the platform that he gives these guys to push their products. Not necessarily Eddie Bravo, because I don't think that Eddie Bravo has any of his, but like there's some of Eddie Bravo's guys that are on BJJ Fanatics, but BJJ Fanatics gives these guys a platform like no
Mm-hmm.
other. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
crazy, crazy.
And you know that you could look at like a guy like Seth Daniels who's doing Fight to Win and
Yep.
giving
But
more
that's
local, smaller guys. But again, we
now
can
we're
go super into the weeds with this. But
right. We won't.
so I think for jiu-jitsu, like we have agreed, sort of like Helio is as far back as we go, is like the start of influence. But since Helio Gracie, who do you think has made modern jiu-jitsu as modern as it is? Like, who's most responsible for that? Who would you say is the most?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think we have to get away from the Gracie family too, because I think that Huron and Henner have done a great job, like kind of advancing that mission of like their family. I think they're carrying the torch pretty well. And from a personal standpoint, like I really like what they're doing with like the law enforcement and everything. So that's completely respectable. In terms of like competitive jujitsu, Marcelo, Eddie Bravo, Keenan, Buchecha,
Yeah.
Cyborg, Gordon Ryan, like all these people have tremendous impacts on the sport. You know what I really like to see, and it's different because the gauge is different with MMA and jiu-jitsu, but I like to see these guys open in gyms and succeeding. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And that's kind of an indicator of how well you're doing, because if your product is like top-notch jiu-jitsu and you open up a gym, like people are going to come. Like that fucking gym that Cyborg has down in Miami, that's Fight Sports. Have you ever seen that fucking place?
Yeah. Dude.
It's unbelievable. So like that's a pretty good gauge as to how like how successful and how much of an impact and how influential these guys are.
Yeah. Well, when I think about who's had the most influence, I tend to selfishly look at like who's influenced me the most.
Yeah, I mean, because for everybody who's listening, the only one who matters here
Right.
is Justin, obviously. So I
It's
mean,
my
that
show. You're
it
listening
goes without saying.
for you know,
Say it's my. Yeah, I'm just here. I'll go fuck myself now.
my show. It's my
Yeah,
show.
it's his show. It's his show.
That's on my list of things to say that I know will make you mad.
Mm-hmm.
I steal the most from Keenan. I steal a lot from Eddie Bravo. Not a lot. I steal some from Eddie Bravo. I really like Twisters and I play Rubber Guard occasionally, but like, and I steal a lot from Marcelo. So I look at those three guys at like, without those three guys, if you take away what they've done for the sport, I think it's a completely different sport. So I think they're on my short list of most impactful athletes. I guess YouTube could also be a YouTube and the internet could also be honorary, but
yeah, we're not going to get into that.
But that's silly, so we're not going to get into that. But so to sum up, I think for MMA, we look at Royce, we look at Ronda. I think for Jiu-Jitsu, we look at Elio Gracie and Keenan, Eddie, Marcelo. If there's people that we missed or you disagree with, tell us in the comments below and we'll get back to you. Is there any that we missed that you think have had a bigger impact?
No, I mean, I think McGregor has had a huge impact. John Jones, those guys, like we said, Chuck Liddell, Bonner, Griffin, like just, you know, we would never understate the significance that those people have had in modern jiu-jitsu. Like you said, I agree with you, Keenan, but you know, Danaher, Marcelo, all those guys, and you can go on and on. Cyborg, Buchecha, Felipe Pena, Andre Galvo, like all these people have had tremendous impact on the sport. But you know, we have to you have to separate it. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have to draw the line somewhere. You know.
Well, I think, again, it's like super subjective. You know, we play a similar jiu-jitsu game. We're similar fans of MMA. So our list is going to be different than someone who hates worm guard, doesn't like leg locks, and doesn't have the internet. So, I mean, I say it's our show. That's our opinion. But I could also see people making an argument that like Josh Barnett has done a lot for catch wrestling. And, you know, I disagree with him being on this list. I'm just trying to present a opposing viewpoint, but
yeah, I agree. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with us. We put links to our social media accounts below, so if you want to follow us individually or if you want to follow the show, just check the links out.
Coming up on the YouTube page later this week, we're going to have our preview show for the Conor McGregor Dustin Poirier fight. You don't want to miss that, so check that out. Also, immediately after the fight, we're going to have our post-fight analysis. That'll be up on YouTube. I say Sunday morning, but it's like 3 a.m. Saturday night. So make sure you're subscribed to YouTube so you can check that out. And if you want to support the show, please check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thatjujitsupodcast. And that link is below as well. Say it's my show.
It's my show.
Yeah, it's my show.
It's my show.
Thanks for listening to my show, everybody. I'll see you next time.
Thanks guys for tuning into my show.